狙いは体制の背骨を折ることだ。その好機は長くは続かない。
他の勢力はどうだ。あの規模の反応に我々は備えがあるのか。
モスクワは語り、北京は見守る。どちらもテヘランのために血を流すことはない。重要なのは革命防衛隊がつまずいた後、何が空白を埋めるかだ。
君たちのアイアンドームが持ちこたえる限り、私は移行期を引き継ぐ準備ができている。
忘れるな、プリンスレザー。無名の淵から君を引き上げたのは我々だ。アイアンドームはこれらの野蛮人に対しイスラエルの防衛線を守り抜いてきた。そしてこれからもそうする。それは破られない。
Good morning, Rise and Freedom. I'm Austin Petersen. You're watching and listening to the Wake Up America show on the 4 Liberty Network. Wake Up America, it's 7 a.m. in the Heartland. It's March 2nd, 2026, and we're witnessing the dawn of a new world. If you woke up this morning feeling a sense of clarity, it's because the cloud of theocratic blackmail that has hung over the West for 47 years has finally been dispelled by the raw, unapologetic power of the American spirit. Yesterday, Operation Epic Fury did what decades of diplomacy failed to do. It severed the head of the serpent. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is dead. The B-2 spirits from Whiteman Air Force Base right here from Missouri, of all places. The GBU 57 bunker busters have spoken, and the Duganist mirage of multipolarity has gone up in smoke. We're not here to celebrate war. We're here to celebrate the triumph of the individual over the slave pen. This morning, we're throwing out the broken scripture of blowback and embracing the harsh realities of the physical world. We are defying the rules-based order of international politics. We're highlighting the Azerrad Doctrine. And today, this morning, we will reclaim the wisdom of Robert Heinlein and Ayn Rand. For the next hour, I'm going to take you into a deep dive into the philosophy of winning, the manifesto of Libertarian Nationalism, and the reason why the Enlightenment just won the ultimate victory in Tehran. But we aren't stopping there. At 8 a.m. Central, John Miltimore will join us to stress test the constitutional reality of this strike. We're going to ask the tough questions about the cost of liberty and the risks of the neocon trap. Then at 8:30 this morning, we're going to go to the ground level in Iran with Fardad Farazad. He's going to tell us exactly what is happening in the streets of Iran right now, if the people are finally ready to take their country back from the ashes of theocracy. This is going to be the most consequential 2 hours in the history of this show. The coffee's hot, the truth will be raw, and the giants are running the room. Before we dive in this morning, make sure you are fueling this mission at forlibertyshop.com. And if you want the deep dive mini docs and the great grift-off unlocks, go to our forlibertyshop.com store. Make purchases during the live show, or thanks to Donald Trump, give us some tax-free tips. On the Rumble Rant, Team America is here. The West is awake, and the drop pods are hitting the atmosphere. Buckle in. Wake up. America starts right now. Would you like to know more? It's a Klendathu drop. Wake up, America. It's Monday, March the 2nd, 2026. The geopolitical architecture of the Middle East has just been leveled by the most significant military engagement since the Cold War. At 0200 Eastern Time on Saturday, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated aerial offensive known as Operation Epic Fury, and the results are staggering. The head of the Iranian regime has been severed. President Trump and the Pentagon confirmed that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is dead. He was killed in a surgical strike on a secure barking compound in Tehran's Pasteur district. It's not a random act of aggression. This was the culmination of 47 years of escalating hostility that began with the 1979 embassy seizure. We're going to look at 1,200 precision munitions that were dropped within the first 24 hours, targeting the very brain of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. For the audience here in Missouri, you need to know the tip of the spear was the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber fleet deployed from Whiteman Air Force Base just down the road. Good job, boys. These aircraft penetrated Iranian airspace to deliver the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a 30,000-pound bunker buster designed to neutralize facilities buried hundreds of feet underground. Sites at Natanz and Fordow, which have been the center of Iran's nuclear ambitions for decades, have been rendered inert. But the price of this security has been paid in blood. U.S. Central Command has confirmed 3 American service members were killed in action during the initial Iranian retaliation strikes against NSA Bahrain and Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. We must understand the history that led up to this moment. Since the 1983 Beirut barracks bombing through the 1990s terror campaigns, to the roadside bombs that killed our soldiers in Iraq, Tehran has operated with a sense of total impunity. That impunity shattered last night. The strike follows a steep decline in regional stability over the last 90 days, including the January 2026 protests in Tehran, where thousands of Iranians took to the streets demanding an end to theocratic rule. We watched 3 rounds of diplomatic talks in Oman fail in February because the regime believed they were days away from a nuclear breakout. Intelligence indicated that a test was imminent, and the decision was made to remove the threat before it became an existential reality. The IRGC Navy is currently smoldering in the Persian Gulf, and the command centers in Isfahan and Kermanshah are in ruins. We're not talking about reoccupying the region or nation building today. We are talking about the systematic destruction of the military infrastructure that has exported chaos since Jimmy Carter was in office. The Ayatollah Khamenei is dead. Their regime is in chaos, and now the world is watching to see what happens next. Wake up, America. The giants have finally re-entered the room, and we've got a long way to go before the smoke clears. The president of Argentina, anarcho-capitalist Javier Milei, issued his words of support to Donald Trump over the weekend in support of these strikes. The most libertarian elected president in the history of the world, perhaps looking for a little payback after the bombings in the 1990s by Iran on their Jewish community in Argentina. Javier Milei says to Donald Trump, "We salute you." Wake up, America. To understand why the smoke over Tehran is sending shockwaves through the global embassies, you have to understand the secret that has been used to hobble Western power for over half a century. And this is a concept I'm now calling the Azerrad Doctrine. Ariel Azerrad, a very sharp analyst and a former staffer for Senator Ted Cruz, recently exposed the big lie of modern international law. She called it the Great Equalizer, which was a system that was specifically designed not to prevent war, but to cripple the West, to make victories impossible to win, and to keep countries like the United States trapped in perpetual hostile quagmires. Under the guise of what they call proportionality and the rules-based order, we have created a suicide pact where bad actors like the Iranian regime can act with absolute impunity, targeting global shipping, funding proxy armies, and planning nuclear apocalypses, while the Western forces that respond get chastised by the UN, the Atlantic, and SEIU-funded NGOs for decades. The international legal architecture that was designed and driven by figures like Neville Roy Singham and his CCP-aligned funding networks. They have rewritten the laws of armed conflict to ensure that strength is treated as a crime. They use something called the Rome Statute and the additional protocols of the Geneva Convention as a sort of a legal IED, arguing that if a terrorist hides behind a child, the nation defending itself is the one committing the war crime. And this is the pinnacle of post-liberal equality, where the civilized world is held to an impossible standard while the barbarians are given a permit to kill. But last night, President Trump did what no other leader had the stomach to do. He smashed the cage by ordering Operation Epic Fury without seeking the permission of a turtle-based UN Security Council. He declared that America is no longer a prisoner of a legal code designed for our own destruction. Now, The Ivy League jurists are already screaming. They're saying it's a war crime, war crime. The usual suspects are out there saying the strike on Khamenei was disproportionate because, of course, apparently in their own twisted logic, destroying the man who orchestrated 40 years of global terror is too much force, right? What they want is to see us trapped in what they're calling the slow bleed strategy. This is where they force us to spend trillions on stabilization, nation building, de-escalation, running away, and our enemies are allowed to build nukes in the dirt. Trump has bucked this nonsense once and for all. He understands that international law, as it exists today, is nothing more than international lawfare, a weaponized bureaucracy funded by our adversaries to ensure that the West can never actually finish the job. So by striking the head of the serpent, we aren't just neutralizing a tyrant, we're also reclaiming our own sovereignty from the globalist architects who want us weak, apologetic, and perpetually at war. Wake up, America. The chains are breaking, and the era of asking permission to survive is officially over. International law. Now, before we get into the weeds of the philosophy surrounding this, we have to address the raw, unfiltered reality of why the Iranian regime cannot be allowed to possess the most destructive technology in human history. This is a flashpoint, especially for our libertarian brethren who believe that any country in the world should be allowed to manufacture a nuclear weapon or have a nuclear weapon because the United States has one and Israel has one. So why shouldn't the Iranians be allowed to have one? Well, I'm going to answer that question right now. For years, the critics have pointed to Donald Trump. They've called him unstable. They called him bellicose. They pointed to tweets and his rhetoric. They say he was going to start World War III. But if you were actually listening to the noise, to the signal, not just the noise, then you probably saw a masterclass in what I like to call the nice doggy doctrine. There's a quote attributed to Will Rogers that perfectly encapsulates this last year of diplomacy. Diplomacy is the art of saying, nice doggy, until you can find a rock. Trump spent months making peace overtures. There were talks. He sent letters to Khamenei. He held talks in Oman and Doha. He gave them every chance to walk back from the brink and become a normal nation. He was saying, nice doggy, to the clerical establishment while he was reaching for the biggest rock in the American arsenal. And why did he need that rock? Because a dictatorial regime, especially one as unstable and ideologically radical as the Islamic Republic, has no moral right to threaten the entire planet with nuclear annihilation. I don't care about the cries of hypocrisy from the actual isolationist crowd. If you are running a childlike theocratic slave pen, you don't get to sit at the adult table with intercontinental ballistic missiles. We already saw the cautionary tale with North Korea. Let's talk about that. Once a tyrant has the nuke, the calculation changes. You have to back away slowly while looking for a rock because, of course, the cost of action becomes unthinkable. We were at these final moments with Iran. Intelligence from the June 2025 war confirmed that they were within 48 hours of a breakout test. And if you doubt the nature of the threat from Iran, look at the targets that they have struck. Iran didn't just lash out at the United States or Israel. They struck at the heart of the Arab world. They attacked Dubai. They targeted Doha. They hit Bahrain. They struck neutral nations and global trading hubs that had nothing to do with the strike on Khamenei. They struck allies who were acting on their behalf to negotiate for them with the Americans. They attacked everyone. That proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that they don't need a nuke to be a threat. They're already acting with the reckless impulsivity of a spoiled brat with a loaded gun. By striking now, we are preventing the North Korea scenario from repeating in the Middle East. We're declaring that arms control for dictators is not a negotiation. It is a requirement for their existence. Trump said, nice doggy. He found the rock, he used the rock, and the nuclear breakout is now buried under 1 million tons of concrete and steel. It's not aggression, it's sanity. It is the recognition that some dogs don't want the treat. They only want to bite. And this weekend, that bite was neutralized. Wake up, America. We have to address the elephant in the room. And for me, this is deeply personal. Over the last 48 hours, as the smoke rose over the ruins of the Ayatollah's command centers, the usual libertarian voices have emerged from the woodwork to repeat the same tired, broken, and quite frankly, dangerous platitudes. They're crying about blowback. It's a theory that I cut my teeth on. I was there in 2008, in 2012. I was on the front lines campaigning for Ron Paul. I was the one interviewing Michael Scheuer for Freedom Watch. Michael Scheuer, the CIA agent who wrote the book about blowback. I pre-interviewed him dozens of times for interviews to have his appearances on the Fox Business Network. I'm deeply knowledgeable about the theory of blowback. I consumed every word of that book. And the problem is, a glaring giant hole is that blowback is essentially just a reaction to U.S. intervention, right? But after decades of watching the world, I've got to be honest with you. The blowback theory has a fatal flaw. It's a form of narcissism that assumes that the entire world is just a passive reflection of American actions. It treats the theocrats in Tehran and the terrorists in the desert like animals who have no agency, like they have no religious ideology or no imperial ambitions of their own. It assumes that if we just go home and hide behind our borders, the wolves will turn into sheep. But that's not reality. That is a fantasy. The modern paleo-libertarian movement has gone off the rails, twisting itself into these bizarre logical knots, where many will actually suggest Osama bin Laden was right on 9/11 because he had grievances. I mean, it is repugnant to watch people that I once respected hold themselves to this perverse moral standard where they justify the murder of Americans while condemning the destruction of a tyrant. Trump derangement syndrome has broken some of them. Many of them cannot deal with reality as it is, so they revert to reciting broken scripture from 20 years ago. In 2016, I opposed Trump. I literally ran for president of the United States to try and compete against him. I was hard-headed. I was stubborn. And I refused to open my eyes to his platform. But on that election night in 2016, you can go back and watch the live stream, me sitting there by myself, opening up his platform for the first time and realizing there was a lot to like. I had been wrong. Libertarianism, as it was understood in the Ron Paul years, whether it's the isolationist crowd or the open borders lolberts, both mistake the moment and the man. Trump has, arguably, been the most libertarian president since Reagan. He is a great president, and I support him even when I disagree with him. Many people who loved me then in 2016 hate me now. But I must do what is right, no matter the cost to my follower count or peer pressure or group dynamics. The blowback myth is dead. We are not the cause of Iran's evil. We're merely the only power brave enough to end it. Wake up, America. It's time to put away childish things and face the world as it actually exists. If you're just tuning into the Wake Up America show, good morning. I'm Austin Petersen. Click the like button. If today's your first time watching the Wake Up America show, click the follow button as well. We'd love to have you be a regular guest of the Wake Up America show. We have bonus content for you to unlock if we raise $100 on today's show, either in Rumble Rants or on purchases at forlibertyshop.com. Then that will unlock the $100 bonus content mini documentary. So get those Rumble Rants early and often. And then, of course, make sure that you click the follow button as well. Now, Steph793 says, why do most people ignore the CIA coup in the 1950s? I definitely do not ignore Operation Ajax. But my argument, Steph, is that the left took over the narrative through the mainstream media in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The left right? There's this idea that the winners write the history. Of course, it's going to make the history books are going to be written by the winners. I'm here to tell you right now that many losers write history books. As a matter of fact, we now live in a society where most of the history is taught by, written by the losers. The winners are out there effing the prom queen and getting wins, touchdowns. Losers always talk about their best. Winners go home and stuff the prom queen. Thank you, Sean Connery. Operation Ajax, the CIA's role in that, deeply overblown. As a matter of fact, the United Kingdom, Britain, had a lot more of an interventionist, had a lot more to do with the 1953 situation than the United States did. Because we're talking about what? We're talking about British petroleum. So if you watch all of the losers documentaries like Bill Moyers and others who talked about shadow government, then remember all of these lefties, remember Moyers worked for Lyndon Johnson. The Democrats wrote the history on this, and of course they're going to point to capitalism, and they're going to point to republicanism. The Republicans, they're the reason for all of this. It's these capitalists, it's these big corporations wanting to protect their oil money. Well, 1953 was a lot less about the United States and a lot more about radical Islam and British oil interests. So I don't discount that, Steph. I don't discount that, Steph, but I would say that it's important to not place an overemphasis on the 1953 Operation Ajax and the intervention, because then, of course, you have to beg the question, oil corporations that are going into these countries, are they not allowed to defend their own property? Like, whose job is it for the oil companies? If you're a pure libertarian, then do you think that the oil companies should be able to hire a private army to defend their property in Iran? So if the sovereign government of Iran in 1953, if the sovereign government of Iran doesn't want British oil, British petroleum to operate within their borders, and so they decide to seize the means of production, which is what happened. They seize the means of production, so they socialize the oil fields there. Then all of the capitalists, all of the Western nations that have these corporations that had private contracts to be able to do business, those can just be overturned overnight. And the American military or the British military, they're not allowed to act on behalf of our own corporations. So what is the solution exactly? That the private army hired by the oil company, these are not simple. What I'm trying to explain is that there are no simple solutions to these problems. There are no simple, it's not just point A happened, the CIA did a coup, and then this happened, and then this happened. It's not that easy. Right? It's not that easy. And I was naive, but now I am a much wiser man. Wake up, America. We have to understand. You have to understand why I've taken this stand. Why am I doing this? Right? There's not a lot of money in going against your audience or in disagreeing with something that you said 20 years ago. But I'm changing my mind on things, and I'm going to explain to you intellectually the through line of my logic and my reason this morning. So if what I am saying concerns you, I am open to being criticized, and I would love to hear your rebuttals. Please tell me where I am wrong, because most of the time, I actually wish that I wasn't right. I would like to be wrong quite often. So you tell me where the holes in my logic are. Try and do it without just repeating a broken platitude from a Ron Paul video from 2008, if you can. Let's talk about this moment that defined an entire generation of libertarian activism. May 17th, 2007, that viral exchange on the South Carolina primary debate stage where Ron Paul looked Rudy Giuliani in the eye and declared that the 9/11 attackers came over here because we were over there. He elicited the concept of blowback, which is the idea that our interventionist foreign policy was the primary catalyst for terrorism against our soul. You'll hear libertarian pundits making this argument all day long, and they will never acknowledge that there's another side of this, because at the time it did seem like it was a revelation, right? An honest reckoning with the cost of empire. And I was the one shouting it from the rooftops. I was naive. And I was too naive to just see how deep the naivety of that position actually went. So while the blowback theory had a kernel of truth regarding the stupidity of nation building, it's since been twisted into a total moral surrender by the modern paleo fringe. They've taken a policy argument and turned it into a theological dogma where America is always the aggressor and every terrorist is merely a victim acting in self-defense. And we're seeing this play out right now with the strikes on Iran. The commentators retreating to their basements, clutching their copies of the Paleo Manifesto or whatever, and suggesting that the Ayatollah has a right to attack us because we dare to protect our interests. Many of these have gone so far off the rails, they've actually started to adopt the Osama bin Laden was right logic, recycling his letter to America as if it were a legitimate indictment instead of the ravings of a mass murdering religious fanatic. That is morally repugnant, and they hold themselves to this perverse, high-minded standard that effectively justifies our own destruction. They argue that if we don't abide by the non-aggression principle to the point of total passivity, then we deserve whatever violence comes our way. That's not libertarianism. That is a suicide pact. That is the naive belief that if you just leave the predator alone, the predator will stop being a predator. But that ignores the fact that Tehran's entire revolutionary identity is built on the destruction of Western civilization. Death to America, death to Israel. Regardless of whether we have a base in Qatar or not, they still want us dead. Now, by holding ourselves responsible for every evil act committed by our enemies, you strip them of their agency, and then you strip yourself of a right to self-defense. I was wrong to think that diplomatic withdrawal was a cure-all for civilizational conflict. This weekend strike wasn't blowback in the making. It was the end of a blowback loop that had been allowed to spit out of control because we were too afraid to act like a sovereign nation, because people would demand international law. What international law? We are the international law. And the United States is not going to apologize for surviving. We're not going to let a recycled debate from 2008 keep us from facing the realities of 2026. Wake up, America. The world is not a debate stage. It is a battlefield. And it's time we stop defending the people who want to kill us. Wake up, America. We've spent the last 20 years trapped in this false dichotomy, told by the media and the political establishment that we can only have two choices. We can either be bloodthirsty neocons who want to spend trillions of dollars nation building in the Middle East, or we can be isolationist pacifists who allow our enemy to build nuclear weapons while we apologize for our own existence. We are a racist nation. We are a DEI nation. We are sorry for our existence, and soon, one day, hopefully the United States will not exist because it's a nation that was built by slaves. Blah, 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 blah. Why don't you shut your cake hole, Yoko? I am here to tell you that there is a third way, a more rational way, and it is called Libertarian Nationalism. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. This is libertarianism with teeth. With balls. It is a recognition that individual liberty cannot exist in a vacuum. It requires the preservation of the nation state that protects the infrastructure of that liberty. I am an individualist. I believe in free markets. I believe in voluntary exchange, but I am not a pacifist. You don't have to be a neocon to want your enemies dead. In fact, the neocons are the ones who have failed us because they wanted to occupy nations and they wanted to teach subsectional, intersectional, ethnic LGBT groups about the beauty of the secret ballot. Libertarian nationalism rejects all of that nonsense. We don't want to own Tehran. We don't want to govern the Iranian people, and we don't want to spend 1 red cent rebuilding their roads or their schools. Libertarian nationalism is about the raw, unapologetic defense of the American interests. It is the synthesis of maximal personal freedom at home and maximal security against external threats. It is the understanding that a sovereign nation has the moral right to neutralize any actor that poses an existential threat to its citizens, period. We're not the world's cop, but we are the master of our own domain. The neocons want to stay forever. The isolationists want to hide forever, but the libertarian nationalist wants to strike fast, strike hard, and come home. We want to believe that once an enemy like the Islamic Republic has spent 40 years initiating force through proxies, terrorism, nuclear blackmail, that the debate is over. They forfeit their sovereignty, and we have the right to defend ours. This is about realism over idealism. It's about the rational self-interest of a free people who refuse to be held hostage by the theocratic maniacs or globalist bureaucrats. We want the freedom to trade, the freedom to build, and the freedom to live without the constant threat of a nuclear-armed tyrant hanging over our heads. If that makes me hawkish in the eyes of the lolberts, so be it. I would rather be a live libertarian with a sword than a dead libertarian in a cage. We are reclaiming the right to win. We're reclaiming the right to put America first without sacrificing the principles of individual liberty. It is a doctrine for a new age. And this weekend in Tehran, the world saw what it looks like in action. Wake up, America. The gloves are off and the rules of the game have officially changed. If you doubt me, if what I say to you sounds alien, then I will share with you now a good example of why Donald Trump is not a neocon, because look at the actual neocons whining and complaining that President Trump didn't ask or invite them to come in and to start doing that nation building exercise that you and I disagree with.
Donald Trump has launched a full-scale bombardment of Iran without the consent of Congress, without really making the case to the American people. But what disturbs me the most is that he has also launched it without a real plan for the Iranian people and for the emergence eventually of a legitimate Iranian state, which is determined by the will of the Iranian people and is run for the benefit of the people of Iran. Over the last more than 40 years now, we've had an Iranian regime that was fanatical, that tried to spread its totalitarian ideology around the world, that repressed its own people. We saw horrific coercion. We saw mass deaths only just a few weeks ago. That has also spent a huge amount of time seeking to divide and demean the opposition, which is now very divided between diaspora and domestic, between ethnic group-based movements and civil society movements, monarchists. There may be some elements of the regime, of the military, who dream of creating now a military dictatorship. All of that is very incoherent, and the policy of the Trump administration has not helped to make it more coherent. We don't have any tools to communicate with the Iranians, and we don't have any tools to help build a legitimate state. I'm very hopeful that...
Thank God. That is great news. If you are a libertarian nationalist, if you are anti-central planning, if you agree with me that you should chop off the head of this snake, not build the schools for the snakes, then you should be happy to hear that. If the neocons are upset about the way that Trump is handling this conflict, that in itself is a silver lining. Thank you for that $20 tip there, Mr. Steelbringer. So think about that, right? It's not nation building because the nation builders are being excluded, right? Wake up, America. We're told by the ivory tower intellectuals and these globalist jurists that sovereignty is sacrosanct, that every nation, no matter how repugnant, has an inalienable right to govern itself without interference. But if you want the moral clarity to understand why the smoking ruins in Tehran are a triumph for justice, then you have to go to the source of rational self-interest. You have to go to Ayn Rand. Now, Rand was the ultimate defender of the individual, and she had zero patience for the idea that a tyrant can hide behind the concept of national rights. Right? She famously wrote that a nation can do it, just as a man can become a criminal, but neither can do it by right. So she called dictatorships outlaw nations and, quote, slave pens. She argued that any free nation has the absolute moral right to invade a slave society, not out of a self-sacrificing duty to, quote, liberate them, but as a matter of its own self-interest. The Islamic Republic of Iran is the definition of a slave pen. It's a regime that does not recognize individual rights, a government that holds total unlimited power over its subjects, and a gang of rulers who have forfeited any claim to moral prerogatives. Ayn Rand taught us that there is no such thing as the right to enslave. When the United States strikes the Ayatollah, we're not violating the rights of Iran because Iran, under the clerics, have no rights. They're outlaws in the community of civilized nations. The isolationists in the libertarian movement want to pretend that the non-aggression principle means we have to wait for the slave pen to launch a nuclear missile before we can act. But Ayn Rand knew that this was a death wish. She understood that a regime that initiates physical force against its own people and exports terror against its neighbors has already declared war on reality itself. This weekend, America, Israel launched strikes acting in their own rational self-interest, and we now say we refuse to recognize the sovereignty of a mafia that hangs dissidents from cranes and funds the murder of Americans. Embrace the objectivist truth that the smallest minority on earth is the individual, and that no collective, no theocracy, and no rules-based order, no international law has the right to sacrifice the individual to a noble-sounding purpose. The Ayatollah wasn't a head of state. He was a gang leader, and his gang just discovered that the West now has the will to enforce the laws of civilization. Wake up, America. We're not the aggressors. We're the policemen of our own survival. And as Ayn Rand said, the destruction of a dictatorship is not a crime. It is a necessity for the preservation of a free society. Ayn Rand? Not a real libertarian? Okay. Wake up, America. To understand this new war theory that we are witnessing in Tehran, we have to move past the failed strategies of the past, and we have to look to the masters of power. No one has mapped the psychology of conflict, in my mind, better than Robert Greene. In his book, 33 Strategies of War, Greene lays out what he calls the polarity strategy. And it's the exact opposite of this weak, muddled de-escalation narrative that we have heard for decades. The strategy is simple. You can't find peace by avoiding a fight, and you cannot defeat an enemy you refuse to define. So by declaring the Ayatollah an existential threat and striking the head of the serpent, Trump has utilized the power of polarity. So he has stopped seeking middle ground with a regime that chants death to America. Robert Greene's book teaches us that a dominating, polarizing presence has more pull than the weak men who try to please everyone. For years, our leaders tried to play middle with Iran. They tried to balance regional interests, and all they did was signal weakness to a predator. The Libertarian Nationalist recognizes that in a world of wolves, the only way to protect the individual is to create a clear line in the sand. Robert Greene says in chapter 1 of the book, by declaring your enemies, you focus your energy. This weekend, America focused its energy. We stopped worried about being liked by the globalist elites, and we started worrying about being feared by the tyrants. We abandoned the stabilization trap that has kept us bleeding in the sand for 20 years. Robert Greene warns against the centerless conflict, that where you try to be everything to everyone, like so many people have tried to be, but instead we should advocate for a decisive blow that breaks the enemy's will and comes home and bad guys dead. Or like Maduro in jail. And that is what we are seeing. So we don't send a diplomatic note. We sent polarizing reality. We forced the entire world to choose a side. And you can see now who are your real friends and who are your real opponents. The entire world has to decide. Do you stand with civilized nations or do you stand with the ashes of a theocratic mafia? Right? Guess what Russia's doing? They're out there signaling that they have no interest in getting involved in this. They were saying our agreement was with the Ayatollah, and the Ayatollah's dead. China doesn't want any of this smoke. Right? And I'm an agnostic. Right? I value reason. I'm a huge Ayn Rand fan. And I know that compromise with evil, from my experience over my lifetime, is just a slow surrender. Trump is utilizing Robert Greene's strategy of the decisive blow, maximum violence, minimum time, to prevent the hostile quagmires. We aren't here to manage Iran. By creating this polarity, we're clarifying the world map. The enemies of the West are weak. The United States is awake. The art of war has finally replaced the art of the apology. Nice doggy, we've found our rock. We are the ones running the show right now. And I won't apologize for wanting America to win. But I'll tell you who doesn't want America to win. I'll tell you, there are people right now who are watching this right now, counting up the bodies of the American servicemen just so that they can say that they were right. They want us to bleed. They want us to suffer. They want their views to go up. They love war and conflict because it helps to benefit them and their viewership count. They want to be right more than they want America to win. Let's talk about the ideology of a man who hates the West and wants us destroyed. He is Alexander Dugin. Wake up, America. Now, to understand the tactical genius of what we're seeing in Tehran, you have to understand the pseudo-intellectual lie that the enemies of the West, the United States, have been telling themselves for a decade. This is a concept that is talked about in foreign policy circles called multipolarity. And this is the brainchild of Alexander Dugin, who is a Russian philosopher. He's often called Putin's Rasputin, who's convinced the global South and the revisionist powers that the American era is over. Dugin's theory argues that the world is no longer unipolar, that the United States is just one weakening pole among many, and that Russia, China, and the Islamic revolutionary world would rise together to create a new geopolitical equilibrium. It's a fantasy designed to give tyrants the courage to challenge the Goliath. But last night in Iran and just 2 months ago in Venezuela, that mirage was permanently shattered. We were told that Russia had Iran's back, that the S-400 air defense systems and the Russian radar networks would render American stealth obsolete. But the B-2 Spirit bombers from Whiteman Air Force Base just down the road here flew through those Russian systems like they were tissue paper. The so-called multipolar partners in Moscow and Beijing did nothing. They watched the smoke rise. They issued mean-spirited press releases while their alliance crumbled under the weight of American superiority. We saw the same story in January during Operation Absolute Resolve in Venezuela. Maduro thought he was safe. He thought that his Cuban advisors and his Russian and Chinese equipment would save him. But U.S. Special Forces kicked in his door, captured him and his wife, transported them to New York to face justice while the rest of the world stood by and watched. The hard truth is, for the third worldists and the Duganists, is that multipolarity is a cope. It's a coping mechanism for the weak and for the enemies of the United States. Russia is bogged down. China is paralyzed, and their hardware is being dismantled on global television with embarrassing ease. You can watch it happen. We're not living in a multipolar world. We're living in a unipolar reality, where the United States is still the sole superpower capable of projecting absolute will on the planet anywhere at a moment's notice. By smashing the IRGC and decapitating the Ayatollah, like it or not, Trump has put Dugin's theory to bed once and for all. We aren't managing the rise of the other poles while we manage the decline of the United States. We're demonstrating there is only one pole that matters when the gloves come off. The world is still unipolar. American power is unmatched, and any tyrant who convinces himself otherwise is just volunteering to be the next smoking crater in the dirt. Wake up, America. The giant never left the room. They just decided to stop whispering. Good morning, Rise and Freedom. I'm Austin Petersen. You're watching and listening to the Wake Up America show on the For Liberty Network. Thank you all for your generous contributions to the show. We are well on the way to unlocking our bonus content. Looks like we're halfway there to unlocking the mini documentary. Keep those Rumble rants rolling in and keep those purchases at For Liberty shop coming in as well. If today's your first time watching the show, when you click the like button, make sure that you click the follow button as well. You'll get a notification when we go live. Mondays through Fridays, 7 to 9 a.m. Central Time. That's the Wake Up America show schedule. So make sure that you come back and join us regularly. Now, let's consider what we're building here. The For Liberty Network is now, as of this week, 5 shows. 5 shows on the For Liberty Network. People like Jennifer Halbein, people like Reveal of Liberty, even people who are a little bit iffy on my views, and people who are very 100% pro my views, Joel Ledamore. You guys have all been building this thing. Thank you for your financial contributions. We have a lot of fantastic things that are happening right now behind the scenes. But tomorrow, on the 3rd of March, we launch Cafecito Libre, starring Mylene Salavarria. So don't go away, guys. Engage with us more, because on Tuesday we launch a new era. Cafecito Libre, a bilingual show starring Cuban refugee, now American citizen and libertarian. She launches her show, Cafecito Libre, on our network tomorrow. It will be Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 to 5 p.m. Central. So make sure that you follow rumble.com/Cafecito Libre. That's rumble.com/Cafecito Libre. If you have never watched any of our shows ever before, and today's your first time, we're glad and grateful to have you here. We hope that you'll be a regular guest. You can text the show if you have questions, comments, criticisms, 573-319-1586. That's 573-319-1586. That's the text line, and you can contact us there for any questions regarding the network. All right, let's get back to work. Let's see here.
Very public forum. Do you have safety concerns? Do you worry about coming out and...
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, we don't have to go into details of security, but there is some security. But that's unfortunately now necessary because of the attack.
But even beyond that, is there a psychological component?
No, not really, no. I mean, I think I realized that I'm kind of tougher than I thought I was.
Wake up, America. To understand the true moral weight of the smoke rising over Tehran, you have to look past the satellite imagery and the battle damage assessments and look at a tale of two men, a tale that represents the ultimate triumph of the human spirit over medieval tyranny. I'm talking about the beautiful, poetic, and absolutely delicious irony of Salman Rushdie. Now, for those who are too young to remember, you go back to February 14th, 1989. On that Valentine's Day, Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the original architect of this theocratic nightmare, issued a fatwa commanding every zealous Muslim on earth to murder Salman Rushdie because he wrote a book called The Satanic Verses. He put a multi-million-dollar bounty on the head of a novelist. Now, for decades, Rushdie was forced into the shadows. He lived under constant police protection. He changed his name to Joseph Anton. He watched his Japanese translator get murdered and his Italian translator get stabbed, all because a dying tyrant in Tehran was afraid of the power of the written word. But fast forward, August 12th, 2022, in Chautauqua, New York, a radicalized extremist acting on the lingering echoes of that fatwa rushed the stage and stabbed Rushdie 15 times. He lost an eye. He lost the use of one hand, but he did not lose his soul. He didn't lose his wit, and he didn't lose his life. And here's the glorious punchline to this historical joke. It's March 2nd, 2026. Salman Rushdie is alive. He's likely sitting somewhere in a bright room in London or New York, breathing the air of freedom. Maybe he's writing his new masterpiece. Maybe he's enjoying a cocktail right now while he's watching the breaking news. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, right? He's outlived the man who issued the fatwa. And as of last night, he has officially outlived the man who renewed it. Ali Khamenei, the man who spent his entire life trying to extinguish the flame of individual expression, is currently buried under the rubble of his own arrogance. The man who ordered the world to kill a writer is dead, and the writer is still here. This is the ultimate victory of the Enlightenment over the Dark Ages. It proves that no matter how many missiles you build, no matter how many morality police you deploy, and no matter how many fatwas you issue, you cannot kill an idea whose time has come. The individual, the skeptic, the man of letters has triumphed over the theocrats, over the collective, over the zealot, has triumphed over the man of the sword. And myself, as an agnostic who values reason above superstition, I cannot think of a more fitting end to the Islamic Republic's reign of terror. The tyrants are gone. The libraries are still standing. The barbarians are dead. And Salman Rushdie gets the last laugh. Wake up, America. The pen is mighty, but when it's backed by a GBU 57 bunker buster from Missouri, it's unstoppable. You're welcome. You're welcome, Salman Rushdie. You are welcome. You are welcome. Wake up, America. I'm an agnostic. I consider myself to be a secular humanist. And I have to admit that there is a particularly refined and deeply satisfying pleasure in watching the architects of theocracy discover that their deity is singularly unwilling to intercept a precision-guided munition. Where is your God now? Where's your God now, Muhammad? Fatwa on you, a fatwa on you, and a fatwa on Larry David, all right? And no one, I mean no one, would have enjoyed this spectacle more than the late, great, and perpetually unbowed Christopher Hitchens. The Hitch, he was the sharpest blade in the arsenal of the Enlightenment, a man who treated theocracy not as a competing political system, but as a malignant tumor on the brain of humanity. He understood that you do not negotiate with men who believe that they have a divine mandate to govern your life and end your civilization. Christopher Hitchens once famously laid out the stakes in what he called his hate and love columns, and it is the perfect rubric for this weekend's fireworks. He said, in the hate column, dictatorship, religion, stupidity, demagogy, censorship, bullying, intimidation. In the love column, literature, irony, humor, the individual, and the defense of free expression. Look at Tehran today and tell me which column is currently burning. The bullies and the intimidators, the men who spent 40 years policing the length of a woman's headscarf while funding the blowing up of commuter buses, have finally met a power that doesn't care about their divine sensibilities. Hitchens would have poured a triple Johnny Walker Black, lit a cigarette, and reminded us that the Ayatollah was not a man of God, but a man of the mud, a squalid, petty, religious fascist whose only contribution to the world was the export of misery. And the witty drollery of this all that Christopher Hitchens is not here to enjoy is that we are sending this theocracy to the ash heap of history by the very tools of Western reason and scientific inquiry that they so desperately hate but are so deeply jealous for. They hate the individual. So we struck the individual at the top. They hate humor. So we made a joke out of their air defenses. They hate irony. So we used the very technology born of secular freedom to vaporize the men who wanted to return the world to the 7th century. Hitchens used to say, what can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. And last night, the claim that the Iranian regime was invincible or protected by the Almighty was permanently dismissed by the evidentiary weight of a bunker buster. It's a triumph for every free-thinking soul on the planet. It's a triumph for the skeptics. It's a triumph for the poet, for the writer, for the author, for the rationalist, or the zealot, and the thug. The hitch slap was delivered from 30,000 feet. The only thing lacking is Christopher himself to give us the eulogy of the Ayatollah that he deserves. Wake up, America. The heavens are silent in defense of Islam, but the sound of tyranny crumbling is the sweetest music that a humanist can hear. Okay, wake up, America. So we've reached the end of the hour, but we're only at the beginning of a new era in American grand strategy, an era where we're going to stop apologizing for our strength and use it with surgical, rational, and unapologetic precision. We spent the last 60 minutes destructing the lies of the globalist cage, smashing the blowback myths of the old guard, and celebrating the triumph of the individual over the theocratic slave pen. But the most important lesson of Operation Epic Fury is not just who we killed, it's what we're not going to do next. Right, the neocons are already on the cable news networks lusting after a nation-building project. They want to send your tax dollars to Tehran to build schools. They want to train a new police force, democratize a regime that's met its end. And I have one word for them: no. Libertarian nationalism is the doctrine of decapitation without occupation. We've proved we can reach out and touch the enemies of civilization anywhere, anytime, without spending trillions of dollars on a 20-year land war. We've neutralized the nuclear threat. We've severed the head of the Revolutionary Guard. We're handing the keys of destiny back to the Iranian people on our way out. Our job is done. In my mind, it's done. The moral imperative of a free nation is to protect its own citizens and its own interests, not to act as the perpetual warden of the Middle East. We're not the world's social worker, and we should not be the world's ATM. We are a sovereign people who demand security at home and respect abroad. And by bucking the rules-based order, acting in our own rational self-interest, President Trump has shown the blueprint for the future. Kill the predators, destroy the bunkers, come home, build our own economy, protect our own borders, enjoy the fruits of our own liberty. We are reclaiming the wisdom of Robert Heinlein and Ayn Rand, recognizing that while violence settles issues, it is the peace of the sovereign individual that is the ultimate prize. The Ayatollah is in the dirt. The Enlightenment is still standing. And Salman Rushdie is still breathing. The giants are no longer asking for permission to survive. We've broken the chains of international lawfare. We've embraced the reality of a unipolar world where American will is the final word. So as the smoke clears over Tehran, don't listen to the voices of fear. Don't listen to the neocon voices of globalist ambition. Just listen to the silence of a neutralized threat. The nightmare of theocratic blackmail is ending. The American spirit is awake, and the best is yet to come. I'm Austin Petersen. This is the Wake Up America show. And it looks like we've unlocked our bonus content. And I don't know if I've dropped it in the thing yet. Yes, there we go. For America's 250th anniversary, I've produced for you a beautiful series of highlights of some of the great victories of the American Army in the American Revolution. Happy 250th anniversary to the United States. When we get in the sweltering heat of the American South, where the fate of a young nation hung by a thread, the year was 1780. The British, under the iron grip of Lord Cornwallis, had swept through the colonies like a red tide, capturing Charleston and crushing patriot hopes in the Carolinas. But in the rugged backcountry, where loyalties ran as deep as the ancient hills, a spark of defiance was about to ignite into a blaze that would change the course of the Revolution. Major Patrick Ferguson, a Scotsman and inventor of a deadly breech-loading rifle, was Cornwallis's left hand in the wilderness. Tasked with rallying loyalist militias, Americans faithful to the crown, he marched into the western frontiers of North and South Carolina, recruiting Tories and quelling rebellion. Ferguson was bold, perhaps too bold. From his camp near Gilberttown, he issued a dire proclamation to the settlers beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains, the fierce frontiersmen known as the Over-Mountain Men. "If you do not desist from your opposition to British arms," he warned, "I shall march this army over the mountains, hang your leaders, and lay waste your country with fire and sword." Those words sealed his doom. The Over-Mountain Men, hardened Scotch-Irish pioneers from the Watauga settlements in what is now Tennessee, along with Virginians and Carolinians, were not men to be threatened idly. They lived by the rifle and the plow, forging lives from untamed wilderness, and they would not bow to a distant king or his haughty major. Word spread like wildfire through the hollows and ridges. Rallied their kin, while from Virginia brought his own contingent. On September 25th, at Sycamore Shoals along the Watauga River, nearly 1,000 mounted riflemen gathered, their long rifles slung across saddles, powder horns at their sides, and resolve etched in their weathered faces. They prayed under the open sky, vowing to defend their homes or die in the attempt. Then they rode east, crossing the roaring Yellow Mountain Gap in a driving rain, their horses slipping on mud-slick trails. Joined by more militias under Benjamin Cleveland and James Williams, their numbers swelled to over 1,400. But speed was their ally. At Cowpens, they selected the swiftest 900 riders and pressed on, eating parched corn and beef on the hoof, sleeping little as they tracked Ferguson's trail. Ferguson, sensing the noose tightening, retreated toward Charlotte and Cornwallis's main army. He begged for reinforcements, boasting that Kings Mountain, a long, rocky spur rising 60 feet above the surrounding forest, its plateau bare and defensible, would be his stronghold. "God Almighty could not drive me from it," he reportedly sneered. By October 6th, he had entrenched there with about 100 loyalists, mostly American Tories from the Carolinas, drilled in British tactics, but armed with muskets and bayonets. Ferguson himself was the sole regular British officer, his green-clad provincials anchoring the line. The Patriots arrived at dawn on October 7th, their scouts confirming Ferguson's position. Under a leaden sky threatening rain, Campbell divided his force into columns. Shelby and Sevier on the north, Cleveland and Williams on the south, with others flanking. They encircled the mountain like wolves closing on prey, dismounting at the base and advancing on foot, using trees and boulders for cover. Tactics honed in Indian wars where every shot counted. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the attack began with a blood-curdling whoop that echoed through the woods. Shelby's men charged up the steep northeast slope, rifles cracking with deadly precision. Ferguson blew his silver whistle, signaling his loyalists to fix bayonets and countercharge. Down the hill they came, steel gleaming, driving the Patriots back in a hail of musket balls. But the Over-Mountain men reformed, their Kentucky-long rifles accurate at 200 yards, picking off redcoats from behind cover. "Aim for the epaulets," they shouted, targeting officers. On the south side, Cleveland's horse stumbled, but he urged his men onward. "A few more rounds, boys!" Wave after wave, the Loyalists charged, 3 times on some fronts, only to be shredded by withering fire. The air filled with acrid smoke, the screams of the wounded and the thunder of gunfire. Ferguson, resplendent in his checkered hunting shirt, galloped back and forth on his white charger, rallying his faltering troops with whistle blasts and saber swings. But the ring tightened. Williams fell mortally wounded, yet his men pressed on. As the Patriots crested the ridge from all sides, chaos reigned on the plateau. Loyalists huddled in wagons for cover, but there was no escape. Ferguson, desperate, gathered a knot of officers and attempted a breakout, hacking at the air with his sword. A volley erupted, rifles from Sevier's Tennesseans and others, and Ferguson tumbled from his horse, his body riddled with 7 or 8 balls. His foot caught in the stirrup, dragged by his panicked mount until aides cut him free. With their leader gone, the Tories raised white flags, crying, "Quarter, quarter!" But fury lingered. Some patriots, remembering Tarleton's massacre at Waxhaws, fired into the surrendering ranks until officers like Campbell restored order. The battle had lasted scarcely an hour, but the toll was grim. 157 Loyalists lay dead, 163 wounded, and 698 captured, nearly their entire force annihilated. The Patriots lost only 28 killed and 62 wounded, a testament to their superior marksmanship and terrain mastery. In the aftermath, the victors stripped the dead, buried their own, and marched prisoners to Hillsborough. 9 Tories were hanged for atrocities, but the rest faced justice later. News of Kings Mountain spread like a shockwave. Cornwallis, stunned, abandoned his advance into North Carolina, retreating to winter quarters. Loyalist recruitment withered, Patriot morale soared. Thomas Jefferson called it the joyful annunciation of that turn of the tide of success which terminated the Revolutionary War with the seal of our independence. From a forgotten hill in the Carolina backcountry, these rough-hewn men, farmers, hunters, fathers, had struck a blow that echoed to Yorktown. The Revolution, once teetering on defeat, now marched inexorably toward victory, proving that in the hands of determined souls, even mountains could be conquered. In a city where businesses never sleep, the technology still crashes. When technology turns criminal, they send up the signal. He's not a myth, and he's definitely not your nephew who knows computers. He installs, he protects, he backs it up, he keeps your business online and out of trouble.
managed IT, security, cloud, support that actually answers the phone. Layer 8 tech. When your network breaks, he wakes. Call Drew before your tech needs a rescue signal.
Are you tired of the strange radioactive effects of leftist culture? Do you ever wonder what happened to good old-fashioned American values? Well, fear no more, because there's a new force fighting back against the cultural rot of today. Introducing Culturama, a right-of-center talk show that's taking back the future today. Hosted by none other than blonde bombshell herself, Daniela Pensack. She's not just talking, she's taking culture back. With sharp takes, brilliant guests, and a few surprises along the way. Tune in to the live video podcast twice a week, because the future doesn't have to be weird. It can be Culturama.
If there wasn't going to be somebody who was a fiery champion of liberty, somebody who would get out there and who would be aggressive, and if they wouldn't do it with more fire or passion than I had, then I would go and I would fight this battle for us. I've fought for the principles that we all share. Parties tend to be secondary to me. We're here because we believe in the principles of liberty. I am not a perfect messenger, but I think I'm a damn good one. This is a replica of our first president's flintlock pistol. You have my full support, my respect, and my gun.
I think that at the heart of my philosophy is much more libertarianism than well, that's the fashionable word these days, I guess. A conservative is no longer just that. He's a libertarian, and always has been.
Yet any time you and I question the schemes of the do-gooders, we're denounced as being against their humanitarian goals. They say we're always against things, we're never for anything.
What is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, private enterprise, but total government control and regulation.
Good morning, Rise and Freedom. I'm Austin Petersen. You're watching and listening to the Wake Up America show on the 4 Liberty Network. The missiles have landed. The Ayatollah Khamenei is dead. But as the physical war in Tehran will wind down in the coming days, at least according to the Trump administration, the constitutional war in Washington is just heating up. While the White House still celebrates a decisive blow, voices on the Hill, most notably Congressman Thomas Massie, are sounding the alarm, arguing that no matter the target, an act of war without congressional declaration is a fundamental betrayal of the supreme law of the land. It's the classic friction point of the American experiment. Can a republic survive the naked force required to protect its civilization, or does the bypass of the legislature turn the commander-in-chief into a Caesar? My next guest, he's a scholar at the American Institute for Economic Research. He spent his career defending the principles of the free society and the free market against the encroaching hand of the state. Joining me now for Mondays with Miltimore, John Miltimore. Good morning, John. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, good morning, Austin. Great to be with you.
Thank you for joining us, John. So, John, you know, I've kind of moved towards a little bit more of a libertarian nationalist framework. I'm guessing you're probably standing firmly with the Massey wing of the movement this morning. So what do you think? Is this a necessary act of civilizational defense, or did we just shred the Constitution to kill a tyrant? Something in between?
Well, you know, sadly, this is the norm for Washington, D.C., right? Like this has become the new normal. We've seen this both your entire adult life or your entire life, in my entire life. This is the new normal when the powers in Washington have a regime that they no longer want to tolerate. That they choose to remove, they do that. And they do that unilaterally. You know, typically we're seeing it more and more. At least you can go back to, you know, George W. Bush, the Iraq War. You know, we remember there, you know, Bush took his case to Congress and got, you know, some votes. Even if it wasn't a formal declaration of war, there was a vote, you know, with Afghanistan and Iraq. Trump didn't even do that. And so I think that's what we got. Am I happy that the Ayatollah is out in Iran? I am. I'm happy for the people of Iran. Okay, at least now we don't know how this ends. Like this, we're kind of seeing this in real time. We don't know if the fighting is going to end. We don't know who's leading in Iran. But Massey's asking the right question, and the Constitution is very clear on this point. Article 1 makes it crystal clear: Congress has the right to declare war. The commander-in-chief under Article 2 has the ability to execute that war. But we seem to have kind of jettisoned Article 1, and presidents can now unilaterally do these actions, and this is dangerous. We have to, the Constitution was written for a reason, and I worry that when you have presidents that can unilaterally remove rogue regimes, it creates a very chaotic world. You can achieve some good that way, but at the end, I think you end up with a lot of problems as well.
So, John, Ayn Rand, she argued that a dictatorship is an outlaw nation, and she claimed that nations like Iran have no rights. If the Iranian regime is essentially a slave pen that initiates force against its own people and the world, do they deserve to have rights, or is their sovereignty supposed to be respected in any way?
So Rand was making a moral argument. She wasn't making a legal argument, and we should distinguish the two. You can make that moral argument, and I can support that and argue against it either way. I'm concerned with the legality of these actions, and this is very clear that the president of the United States does not have the power to unilaterally declare war, and that's what's done here. We can't really sugarcoat this. I don't even think Trump is saying it's going to be we have the War Powers Act that of '73 that says. Which we should look at the history of that the only reason that was passed was because Nixon was unilaterally in a war, and they said, well, you can't do that. Here's what you can do. So that whole act was created to kind of push back against the imperial presidency, but no president really honors that either. They all say this is infringes on Article 2.
Which war did Nixon get us into?
Well, he didn't get us into it. He was continuing to fight it, right? We're in Vietnam, and that was it. But you had Kennedy first, and then LBJ, and Nixon got us out of that war. But he was defending his ability to fight that war. Like a lot of things, like Nixon created a lot of problems. You can't really lay Vietnam on his at his doorstep. But we live today in a world where presidents seem to have this power to go and project power anywhere on the map. And we're doing it more nakedly than ever before. I think at least in years past, you had the pretense of Congress being involved. I don't think we live in that world even anymore. Like this was just an action, whether it's Maduro or Iran. We're projecting power around the globe without Congress.
Well, would you like to go back to the George Bush years? Do you think that we should follow the Bush doctrine? Because George H.W. Bush sought and obtained a congressional authorization for the Gulf War. He formally requested a joint resolution from Congress. House voted in favor, Senate voted in favor. He signed into law the authorization for the use of military force against Iraq, and he did so based on the United Nations Security Council resolutions. So should we go back to the Bush years of seeking congressional authorization so that we can pursue United Nations goals?
I'd like us to go back to the 19th century, where we have formal declarations of war for these engagements, and that's the way I see it.
But I mean,
versus Congress giving a rubber stamp of approval.
But you see what I'm going. You see what I'm saying here? Like Donald Trump didn't go and do what the Bushes did, which was to seek a congressional authorization for the use of military force because we're a signatory to treaties under the United Nations. So in some ways, the American president's hands are tied, or at least Bush believed that the American presidents had to follow international law, which was, of course, that we have to seek the permission for the United Nations. If we were going to do what we did in Iran, do you think that it should have been done through our current treaties and through the United Nations if Congress had authorized it?
I think we should honor, treaties that we're signatories of course. But no, I don't think we need the UN's approval to wage war. And I don't think the founding fathers would have said that either. The congressional authorization is what is required. And I would say, yes, getting congressional approval like done during the Bush years is better than no congressional approval. And I imagine you agree with me on that point, Austin. I don't know.
No, I don't. Because I don't agree with the United Nations.
No, I'm not talking about the UN. I'm talking about Congress. Again,
that's how they did it because George H.W. Bush in 1991 formally requested a joint resolution from Congress. Okay, we're talking about Desert War I. The House voted in favor, the Senate voted in favor, and their legal authorization, because you're talking about, you're concerned about legal authorization. The legal authorization was there that was granted to them from the United Nations. So, but you said we should obey our treaties. So, but the problem is that the treaties are in conflict with the ideology here, because underneath the treaty as it stands, John, we're supposed to seek authorization from the United Nations, which is a violation of American sovereignty. You see this interconnected web.
I don't think this is that complicated. So if you go back to Iraq, so what we did have in Iraq, we had a previous war, right? And we had all these resolutions that came in. There was a peace reached. So you did have that was it. Iraq was a very unique scenario because you had the first Gulf War, and then you had Iraq that did violate all of those. We know that Iraq was violating the agreement it signed, and the best argument. I still have people to this day that argue to me that the Iraq War was justified, and they do it through those grounds, saying like, no, we had a peace with Iraq. They violated that peace agreement, and we had rights, both through the Constitution and through the United, the UN that authorized those latter strikes. And to me, that's a better argument. But I'm leaving the UN out of it. Iran, is a different animal. We didn't have a first, declared war with Iran, so the UN, put the UN aside. I think if we are going to be waging wars anywhere, whether it's Iran or Venezuela, having congressional authorization for those wars is necessary.
Okay. The problem with Congress is that many of them are traitors. And many of them hate the United States, and many of them would gleefully leak war plans to our enemies because they're working against the interests of the United States. How, as a president, can you operate in a world now where information travels at the speed of light? You were talking about going back to a military strategy. You said the 18th century. I said
19th century.
19th century. So you literally want to go back to the 1800s when, you had to go across the ocean to carry a letter because there was no internet, there were no telephones. There were no telegraph cables until the late 1800s, John. So
this is the argument people make against the Constitution, saying, well, the Second Amendment shouldn't apply because back then.
I make arguments against the Constitution all the time, like the 16th Amendments and the 17th Amendments. I think the Second Amendment should have not included any kind of a militia cause. It should have been for any individual. It's not the Bible, right? So we're allowed to criticize the Constitution. It's not a holy document. The founders.
If you want to change the document, change the Constitution.
That's
what you do. You don't just ignore Article 1.
Well, you do in regards to national security questions, because the president has legitimate war powers. Would it be in your mind legitimate or legitimized if after 90 days he went back and sought authorization for what he had just done? If he does what he says, wraps it up in 4 weeks or less, goes to Congress and seeks authorization for what he did under the War Powers Act, would it then be allowable in your mind?
Allowable? Would it be better? I suppose so. I don't think Trump's going to do that. I don't think he's, feels that the War Powers Act even applies to him. But to me, this idea that we just ignore the Article 1 of the Constitution because it's inconvenient, the founding fathers would have said, of course, all of these things with defense come down to national security, but that doesn't mean that we leave Congress out. And if we really want to live in a world where the president of the United States can unilaterally declare war when he wants, for any emergency. Do you want to live in? You think that's the world that is a better world, Austin?
I really don't know. I'll say this. I think that under Trump, it has been a better world. I think that we can argue theory all day long, but the reality is that I think that the United States has improved to a degree. I think that rather than this sort of managed decline, I think we've lived under a period of what we call managed decline. And I think that the enemies of the United States, like Alexander Dugin and others, like Iran and China and Russia, I think they all wanted to believe that there was this concept of multipolarity, that the United States was a dying superpower. And I think a lot of Americans and a lot of American congressmen, unfortunately, believed in this kind of Euro ideal that the West was declining and dying. And I think that Trump, like chemotherapy, has come in and he's nuked the patient. And I think it's a potent poison, but it was probably a necessary poison for us to get out of this managed decline mindset and return to a mindset of American excellence, American success. Is it going to be bloody? Yes. Were the left going to throw themselves and their cars into ICE agents? If we had a Javier Milei here, I think that the left would still be doing a lot of the things that they're doing. We'd still have to deal with the left. It's just that Trump is, the biggest, closest stick that he's like, you remember that Will Rogers quote, "Diplomacy is the art of saying nice doggy while looking for a rock, John." I kind of feel like Trump is like that, but I'll give you the closing statement because I got another guest. I got to run.
No, I understand. Like this, to me, I'm not arguing this about Trump, his legacy. It's the simple ability of the United States, the U.S. president, who can declare war for any reason, and that is viewed as a constitutional action. This isn't about Trump to me. Whether it was Obama doing this or Biden doing this or Trump, I'm saying go back to Syria, for example. That was an engagement. People say, well, we got rid of Gaddafi. Look at, how can you argue against this? Well, then you look at, Syria turned out to be a mess. But I guess I would encourage people not to look at this through the lens of what it achieves. Some unilateral, executive action in defense or war, as Trump has called it. I like that he's called it the Department of War. Some of those will yield better fruit than others. But we need to examine the way that we go to war. If we have presidents that can just unilaterally declare war and invade countries, we are an empire in every way once we reach that point. At that point, the republic is over.
Well, I think
we're in big trouble.
Yeah, you make a good point. I'd love to spar with you on this one, John. We got a late start, unfortunately. Maybe if we're still in this conflict next week, then maybe you'll have changed my mind and I'll be coming over to your side of things. Okay.
Sounds like a plan. You have a good week, Austin.
You too. Thank you very much, John. That's John Miltimore. Joins us every Monday here on the Wake Up America show. Mondays with Miltimore. Now it's time to get down to the streets. Take it down to the streets. Fardad Fazad joins us live here in less than 5 to talk about what's happening on the streets.
To life. Just to explain that in 2025, men can get pregnant, waving an American flag might offend someone, and our government is $34 trillion in debt. But that's not all, George. We have drag queen story hour for toddlers, pronouns are mandatory, and Harvard can't define woman. Oh. And we send billions to Ukraine but can't fix potholes in Ohio. Just normal modern empire stuff. I'm sure he'd be totally cool with it. Right after he finishes reloading. He didn't cross the Delaware for this nonsense, but you can carry on the fight with gear that would have made King George cry. Shop bold, shop free, shop4libertyshop.com. Picture this. It's 1776. Thomas Jefferson is hunched over his desk at Monticello, ink-stained fingers, writing the most radical document in human history. Do you really think he was sipping Starbucks? No. He was drinking something bold, something black, something brewed strong enough to fuel a revolution. That's the spirit behind Founding Flavors, our signature line of liberty-fueled coffee. No soy froth, no climate guilt, no corporate slogans. Just real coffee, inspired by the men who wrote freedom into existence. Every cup is a quiet protest. Against mediocrity, against tyranny, against bad coffee. So this morning, skip the globalist brew. Grab something worthy of a free man's sunrise. Founding Flavors. Now brewing at forlibertyshop.com. Legend has it, back in 1773, a band of angry, overtaxed patriots stormed a British ship, found the king's favorite tea, and said, "This would taste better without the tyranny." Then they tossed it overboard. Fast forward to today. That revolutionary spirit lives on in Boston Harbor Black, the boldest brew in the For Liberty tea lineup. It's dark, it's smooth, it's unapologetically American, just like the folks who drink it. Whether you're sweetening it up on the front porch or drinking it straight like a Minuteman before battle, this isn't tea for royalty, it's tea for rebels. No fake flavors, no corporate slogans, just a cold glass of Don't Tread on Me in liquid form. So skip the woke iced tea aisle and stock up on Boston Harbor Black at forlibertyshop.com. Because when the heat's rising, the least you can do is drink like a patriot. When the Founding Fathers dreamed of liberty, they forgot one thing: coffee. Introducing Founding Flavors Coffee, the brew that built America, and the brew that's fueling a new revolution, one kitchen at a time. Small batch roasted, patriot approved, and disappearing faster than a redcoat at Yorktown. Don't get left behind, soldier. Real patriots are starting their mornings with Founding Flavors, and trust us, freedom tastes better with a fresh cup in your hand. Stop drinking those tyrant brews who take your money and don't support your values. Stocks are limited, demand is booming, and your morning deserves a taste of liberty. Order now at forlibertyshop.com before the next shipment gets signed, sealed, and sold out. Founding Flavors Coffee, the official brew of morning rebellions everywhere. Get yours at forlibertyshop.com.
Are you tired of the strange radioactive effects of leftist culture? Do you ever wonder what happened to good old-fashioned American values? Well, fear no more, because there's a new force fighting back against the cultural rot of today. Introducing Culturama, a right-of-center talk show that's taking back the future today. Hosted by none other than blonde bombshell herself, Daniela Pensack. She's not just talking, she's taking culture back, with sharp takes, brilliant guests, and a few surprises along the way. Tune in to the live video podcast twice a week, because the future doesn't have to be weird. It can be Culturama.
If there wasn't going to be somebody who was a fiery champion of liberty, somebody who would get out there and who would be aggressive, and if they wouldn't do it with more fire or passion than I had, then I would go and I would fight this battle for us. I've fought for the principles that we all share. Parties tend to be secondary to me. We're here because we believe in the principles of liberty. I am not a perfect messenger, but I think I'm a damn good one. This is a replica of our first president's flintlock pistol. You have my full support, my respect, and my gun.
I think that the heart of my philosophy is much more libertarianism than well, that's the fashionable word these days, I guess. A conservative is no longer just that. He's a libertarian and always has been.
Yet any time you and I question the schemes of the do-gooders, we're denounced as being against their humanitarian goals. They say we're always against things, we're never for anything.
What is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, private enterprise, but total government control and regulation.
with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. This is the issue of this election. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
The conservative, so-called, is the one that says less government, get off my back, get out of my pocket, and let me have more control of my own destiny.
The left in America tells us not to have kids to save the planet, but in Cuba, they stopped having kids because the state destroyed the earth.
Collectivism doesn't create justice. It creates shortages, corruption, and power for the few. I've not just seen it, I've lived it. My family escaped it. Now, the same failed ideas are being sold to a new generation. I'm here to expose the lie and defend liberty. From Cuba to Argentina to the United States, the freedom movement is rising. Cafecito Libre is the exile voice of economic truth. Cafecito Libre, premiering March 3rd as part of the For Liberty Network, only on Rumble.
これまでの第三次世界大戦、アメリカ合衆国はマドゥロを拘束するためのニュースは世界中を駆け巡り、あらゆる放送を席巻していた。だが彼らの知らぬところで、イランでは長き眠りについていた獅子が目覚め始めていた。
通信を遮断しろ。こんな姿を世界に見せるわけにはいかん。しましいモサドめ、奴らが裏で糸を引いている。フィレラ私がマドゥロのようにただ横たわると思っているのか。全員撃て。
国民の意志を見せてやる。
Good morning, Rise and Freedom. Fardad Farzad will not be joining us here live today on the Wake Up America show. If you want to understand, though, why I have moved from the more non-interventionist Ron Paul wing of the movement to a more hardened libertarian nationalism in recent years, you have to look at the man who provided the intellectual DNA for both sides of that coin, Robert Heinlein. Now, the Lulberts love to quote, "The moon is a harsh mistress." It's the Bible of rational anarchy, the book that gave us Tannstaffel. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. They think that Heinlein was a pacifist because he hated taxes, but they are wrong. Heinlein was the graduate of the Naval Academy, class of 1929. He didn't just write about liberty. He understood that liberty is a fragile, artificial construct that exists only because men with guns are willing to defend its perimeter. You cannot have the rational anarchy of Luna without the mobile infantry of Starship Troopers. Heinlein himself said that he was an utter anarchist by a very narrow margin. The margin being his realization that a complex society cannot survive without sheer force, both internal and external. He wasn't a neocon, but he was a Darwinist. He understood that in a universe of limited resources and hostile actors, the breed that forgets the utility of force is the breed that ends up in the fossil record. Let's talk about the quote that makes the modern isolationists faint. Violence, naked force, has settled more issues in history than any other factor, and the contrary opinion is wishful thinking at its worst. Those aren't just nice words from Heinlein. They are an indictment of the diplomacy that has dominated our policy for 40 years. Heinlein wrote Starship Troopers in 1958 because he was outraged by a newspaper ad calling for a unilateral suspension of nuclear testing by the United States. He saw the starry-eyed internationalists as a mortal danger to civilization. Heinlein argued that anyone who thinks violence never settles anything should go ask the ghosts of Napoleon. When we strike the Ayatollah in Tehran, you aren't initiating aggression, you're resolving a 40-year-old aggressive dispute that diplomacy couldn't settle. Now, the isolationists will say, wait for the debate. Heinlein said, breeds that forget this basic truth have always paid for it with their lives and their freedoms. The United States used the supreme authority of force to settle the Iranian nuclear question once and for all. Citizenship versus civilianism. Wake up, America. Heinlein famously drew a line in the sand between the citizen and the civilian. In the Terran Federation, you only got the right to vote if you were willing to put your life on the line for the body politic. Why? Because as Heinlein's character, Colonel Dubois, said, to permit irresponsible authority is to sow disaster. The problem with modern libertarianism is that it has become a movement of civilians who want all the benefits of a free society with none of the responsibility to defend it. They think non-aggression means non-defense. They think that they can stay neutral while a theocratic mafia builds ICBMs to incinerate their cities. Robert Heinlein argued that the moral difference between a soldier and a civilian is that the soldier accepts personal responsibility for the safety of the society, and the civilian does not. We're moving towards a libertarian nationalist idea where we recognize that you don't get to keep your rights if you aren't willing to smite the wicked who want to take them away. Wake up, America. I have been calling out the, quote, doctrinaire libertarians all morning. They call them Café Libertarios in Argentina. Heinlein had their number back in the 1970s. He proposed what he called the lifeboat problem. So let's say you're the officer of a lifeboat filled to capacity. Others are in the freezing water. If you try to save everyone, the boat sinks and everyone dies. If a doctrinaire libertarian tries to, quote, take a vote or argues about natural rights while the boat is taking on water, Heinlein famously said, I would shoot that bastard just for drill. So this is the fatal flaw of the modern isolationists. They are so enamored with their nap theory that they would let the entire civilization sink rather than make a pragmatic, hard-headed decision to survive. Heinlein called these people a mortal danger to their shipmates. When we see the Iranian regime is reaching for a nuke, that is a lifeboat problem. We don't have time for a seminar on the ethics of preemption. We have a responsibility to keep the boat afloat. Consider this, talking science fiction. If the United States decides to create a backup of civilization, let's say that we're able to build a ship that will take us from Earth to Mars, and we want to build a colony on Mars. We want to commit to having a backup of our civilization. Do you think that the governance of that ship, let's say that, in order to make this more interesting, let's say that the United States wants to set up a colony on a planet that is outside of our solar system. So we find another solar system close enough, it's in the Milky Way. We want to send a ship to colonize that solar system. What should the governance system of that ship be? Think about this. What should the governance of that ship be? Well, if you're going to send a ship like that and you're hoping to seed humanity in another and this is something we're talking about doing right now. This is on the civilizational table, these questions. So if you were going to send a spaceship to another solar system and try and have that group of humans live during the journey, would you run that ship under military orders? Would it be something like Battlestar Galactica, where you have the military running the ship, but it's the civilian government on board that really makes all of the important decisions? What happens if the civilian government decides to make a decision that would end in disaster, military disaster, for the citizens of that ship? So should that ship then be a military dictatorship from the time that it leaves Earth until the time that it arrives? How would you set up that kind of arrangement? What do you do when the democracy votes for self-immolation in such a situation? Those are the kinds of questions that have only been the realm of science fiction until today. So ask yourself this: would you rather have that military mission run by a civilian government on board, or would you rather it be the military professionals, the people who are trained to run these spaceships? Should they be the ones who are in charge? Should they be the ones who make those decisions? These are the questions of tomorrow that you're asking, that we are asking now to you, to help you sharpen your views, to help you sharpen your belief systems. This way we can build a stronger, more ideologically coherent liberty movement in the future. Wake up, America. Robert Heinlein was a fan of the American experiment, but he was a critic of its poetry. In Starship Troopers, he took a hammer to the idea of unalienable rights. He asks, what right to life has a man who is drowning in the Pacific? The ocean will not hearken to his cries. He argued that liberty is never unalienable. He says it's an expensive commodity that must be redeemed regularly with the blood of patriots, or it always vanishes. The isolationists treat liberty like it's a free gift from the universe. Heinlein treated it like a debt that has to be paid in agony and sweat. Which one do you agree with? If you refuse to strike a tyrant like Khamenei, we're trying to get liberty on the cheap. We're trying to have a free lunch in a universe where the tab is always settled in lead and steel. This weekend, we made a payment on that debt. We recognize that our right to live without the threat of a nuclear armed mullah is only as strong as our will to destroy the launch pad. Wake up, America. You can be a rational anarchist and still want your enemies vaporized. You can hate the state and still love the nation. Heinlein showed us the way. He hated the bureaucracy. He hated the taxes. He hated the busybodies. But he understood that the hive, like the arachnids in his book, or the IRGC in our world, they don't care about your philosophy. They are a communal entity, a collective dictatorship, and they only understand one language. We're synthesizing the individualism of Ayn Rand with the responsibility of Heinlein. We are building a libertarianism that doesn't just cower in the corner reciting mantras while the world burns. We're building a movement that recognizes that a free man's first duty is to stay alive. We are doing our part by ensuring that the enemies of liberty are dead before they can strike. Naked force settled the issue in Tehran, and as Heinlein would say, the contrary opinion is wishful thinking at its worst. Wake up, America. The shipmates are safe, the tyrants are ashes, and the price of liberty has been paid in full and in blood. Would you like to know more? I know. Wake up, America. If you want to understand the moral clarity behind the strikes in Tehran, you have to abandon the altruistic lies of the international community and embrace the cold, hard logic of Ayn Rand. Let's talk about her. She had a visceral, uncompromising hatred for any system that sacrificed their mind to the collective. When people talk about respecting Iranian sovereignty, they're speaking a language that Rand would find repulsive. She famously stated in her 1962 lecture, Collectivism on Campus, that a dictatorship is an outlaw nation. She argued that a government doesn't recognize the right of its own citizens has no rights of its own. To Ayn Rand, the Islamic Republic wasn't a country. It was a criminal gang that has seized a piece of territory. You don't invade a slave pen. You liberate the human potential trapped inside, or you dismantle the walls to ensure that they don't come out and fall and crush you. And we have to talk about the controversial Rand, the one who sat down with Donahue and Ford Hall Forum and spoke the truth that the Lulberts are too afraid to even whisper. In 1974, Rand was asked about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and she didn't mince words. She called the conflict one between civilized men and savages, one that would get you booed out of a Libertarian Party meeting faster than you could say nap. But she wasn't talking about race, Chase Oliver. She was talking about philosophy. She said, when you have civilized men fighting savages, you support the civilized men no matter who they are. And she defined the savages as those who had not progressed beyond the tribal level, who didn't recognize private property, and who wanted to destroy the only country in the region that shared the values of the West, Israel. She saw the theocracies of the Middle East as a rejection of the Enlightenment, a rejection of reason, and a rejection of the 20th century. Last night, we didn't just strike a military target, we struck a blow for civilization against the forces of primitive tribal collectivism. Wake up, America. Rand had a very specific view on who has the right to territory. In Ayn Rand's Q&A on the Middle East, she argued that the, quote, right to land belongs to those who use it for production and follow the principles of individual liberty. She said that if you have a group of people who want to live like primitive nomads on top of oil they didn't discover and didn't know how to extract, they have no moral claim against a civilized nation that needs those resources for its survival. That is the core of libertarian nationalism. You aren't stealing anything. You are asserting the right of the producer to exist without being held hostage by the looter. The Iranian regime is the ultimate looter. They take the wealth of their power to fund terror and nukes. Rand would say that by destroying their command centers, we're simply reclaiming the world for the men of the mind. Do you agree with her? The isolationists love to throw the non-aggression principle in our face, but Ayn Rand understood that self-defense is the only moral justification for force. In The Virtue of Selfishness, she wrote, "The man who initiates the use of physical force is the one who acts on the level of a brute, but he who uses force in self-defense is the one who acts on the level of a human being." Well, the Iranian regime initiated force in 1979 when they took the American embassy. They initiated force every time that a Hezbollah rocket hit a civilian or an IED hit an American soldier. To Rand, we aren't starting a war. We are finishing one that the looters started decades ago. There's no non-aggression towards a man who already has a gun pointed at your head. You pull the trigger first because your life is the ultimate value. For 40 years, the West has practiced what Rand called the sanction of the victim. We've apologized for our wealth. We've apologized for our technology, and we've allowed a group of medieval clerics to lecture us on morality while they fund the destruction of our world. Rand argued that the good must never apologize to the evil. She said, evil is impotent. It can only exist by the sanction that you give it. By seeking multilateral approval like the Bushes did in Gulf War I, or begging for diplomatic solutions, we have been sanctioning the Ayatollah's right to exist. Last night, Donald Trump withdrew the sanction. He looked at the looters in Tehran and said, "You have no power over us." We stopped being the victim that funds its own executioner. We embraced a selfish desire to live in a world without nuclear-armed fanatics. And we're done apologizing. We are witnessing a real-world Atlas Shrugged moment. The looters of the world, the Dugans, the Ayatollahs, the globalist bureaucrats, they thought they could tie down the American giant with a million little international law threads. They thought we'd stay in the quagmire forever. We would pay the bill for our own destruction. We would manage our own decline. But no. We are realizing we don't need their international law. We're certainly not going to allow the world to become multipolar, and damn straight we're not going to manage our own decline. America's best time is coming. We don't need to ask anyone's permission to survive. As Rand said in John Galt's speech, she said, "I will never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine." We are applying that to the nation. We will not live for the sake of stabilizing a slave pen. We will not ask our soldiers to die for the sovereignty of a tyrant. We're striking the head of the serpent, and we're coming home to build a world that belongs to the individual. Wake up, America. The looters, the tyrants, the theocrats, the traitors, the haters of America in the West, the third world, they're all in retreat. The producers, the code of the Enlightenment, it has returned now to the battlefield. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you all enjoyed the show today. I'm sure that I lost a few friends, but hopefully I gained a few more. Make sure that you come back and join us again tomorrow. Cafecito Libre launches live tomorrow, 3 to 5 p.m. Central. Make sure that you guys are locked and loaded. Follow rumble.com/Cafecito Libre. As you exit, we don't exit through the gift shop. We exit through the grift shop. Head to forlibertyshop.com. Grab a box of Founding Flavors coffee. Try our delicious K-Cups. This morning, Colton and I were drinking Knox's Continental Kick. It's absolutely delicious. You can get a box at forlibertyshop.com. Sign up to have it delivered to your door. If you've tried it, write us a 5-star review. Head over to forlibertyshop.com. Support the For Liberty Network as we launch our 5th show this month, and lots more exciting announcements to come. We'll see you right back again here tomorrow on the Wake Up America show. And what network is that on? The For Liberty Network. Have a great day, guys.
In the sweltering heat of the American South, where the fate of a young nation hung by a thread, the year was 1780. The British, under the iron grip of Lord Cornwallis, had swept through the colonies like a red tide, capturing Charleston and crushing patriot hopes in the Carolinas. But in the rugged backcountry, where loyalties ran as deep as the ancient hills, a spark of defiance was about to ignite into a blaze that would change the course of the Revolution. Major Patrick Ferguson, a Scotsman and inventor of a deadly breech-loading rifle, was Cornwallis's left hand in the wilderness. Tasked with rallying loyalist militias, Americans faithful to the crown, he marched into the western frontiers of North and South Carolina, recruiting Tories and quelling rebellion. Ferguson was bold, perhaps too bold. From his camp near Gilberttown, he issued a dire proclamation to the settlers beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains, the fierce frontiersmen known as the Over-Mountain Men. "If you do not desist from your opposition to British arms," he warned, "I shall march this army over the mountains, hang your leaders, and lay waste your country with fire and sword." Those words sealed his doom. The Over-Mountain Men, hardened Scotch-Irish pioneers from the Watauga settlements in what is now Tennessee, along with Virginians and Carolinians, were not men to be threatened idly. They lived by the rifle and the plow, forging lives from untamed wilderness, and they would not bow to a distant king or his haughty major. Word spread like wildfire through the hollows and ridges. Rallied their kin, while from Virginia brought his own contingent. On September 25th, at Sycamore Shoals along the Watauga River, nearly 1,000 mounted riflemen gathered, their long rifles slung across saddles, powder horns at their sides, and resolve etched in their weathered faces. They prayed under the open sky, vowing to defend their homes or die in the attempt. Then they rode east, crossing the roaring Yellow Mountain Gap in a driving rain, their horses slipping on mud-slick trails. Joined by more militias under Benjamin Cleveland and James Williams, their numbers swelled to over 1,400. But speed was their ally. At Cowpens, they selected the swiftest 900 riders and pressed on, eating parched corn and beef on the hoof, sleeping little as they tracked Ferguson's trail. Ferguson, sensing the noose tightening, retreated toward Charlotte and Cornwallis's main army. He begged for reinforcements, boasting that Kings Mountain, a long, rocky spur rising 60 feet above the surrounding forest, its plateau bare and defensible, would be his stronghold. God Almighty could not drive me from it, he reportedly sneered. By October 6th, he had entrenched there with about 100 loyalists, mostly American Tories from the Carolinas, drilled in British tactics, but armed with muskets and bayonets. Ferguson himself was the sole regular British officer, his green-clad provincials anchoring the line. The Patriots arrived at dawn on October 7th, their scouts confirming Ferguson's position. Under a leaden sky threatening rain, Campbell divided his force into columns. Shelby and Sevier on the north, Cleveland and Williams on the south, with others flanking. They encircled the mountain like wolves closing on prey, dismounting at the base and advancing on foot, using trees and boulders for cover. Tactics honed in Indian wars where every shot counted. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the attack began with a blood-curdling whoop that echoed through the woods. Shelby's men charged up the steep northeast slope, rifles cracking with deadly precision. Ferguson blew his silver whistle, signaling his loyalists to fix bayonets and countercharge. Down the hill they came, steel gleaming, driving the Patriots back in a hail of musket balls. But the Over-Mountain men reformed, their Kentucky-long rifles accurate at 200 yards, picking off redcoats from behind cover. "Aim for the epaulets," they shouted, targeting officers. On the south side, Cleveland's horse stumbled, but he urged his men onward. "A few more rounds, boys!" Wave after wave, the Loyalists charged, 3 times on some fronts, only to be shredded by withering fire. The air filled with acrid smoke, the screams of the wounded and the thunder of gunfire. Ferguson, resplendent in his checkered hunting shirt, galloped back and forth on his white charger, rallying his faltering troops with whistle blasts and saber swings. But the ring tightened. Williams fell mortally wounded, yet his men pressed on. As the Patriots crested the ridge from all sides, chaos reigned on the plateau. Loyalists huddled in wagons for cover, but there was no escape. Ferguson, desperate, gathered a knot of officers and attempted a breakout, hacking at the air with his sword. A volley erupted, rifles from Sevier's Tennesseans and others, and Ferguson tumbled from his horse, his body riddled with 7 or 8 balls. His foot caught in the stirrup, dragged by his panicked mount until aides cut him free. With their leader gone, the Tories raised white flags, crying, "Quarter, quarter!" But fury lingered. Some patriots, remembering Tarleton's massacre at Waxhaws, fired into the surrendering ranks until officers like Campbell restored order. The battle had lasted scarcely an hour, but the toll was grim. 157 Loyalists lay dead, 163 wounded, and 698 captured, nearly their entire force annihilated. The Patriots lost only 28 killed and 62 wounded, a testament to their superior marksmanship and terrain mastery. In the aftermath, the victors stripped the dead, buried their own, and marched prisoners to Hillsborough. 9 Tories were hanged for atrocities, but the rest faced justice later. News of Kings Mountain spread like a shockwave. Cornwallis, stunned, abandoned his advance into North Carolina, retreating to winter quarters. Loyalist recruitment withered, Patriot morale soared. Thomas Jefferson called it the joyful annunciation of that turn of the tide of success which terminated the Revolutionary War with the seal of our independence. From a forgotten hill in the Carolina backcountry, these rough-hewn men, farmers, hunters, fathers, had struck a blow that echoed to Yorktown. The Revolution, once teetering on defeat, now marched inexorably toward victory, proving that in the hands of determined souls, even mountains could be conquered.